Have you ever gotten a grade back on an essay or a presentation and just thought, wait, what? How did they even come up with that number? It's a totally fair question. Unlike a math problem, there's no single perfect answer when it comes to a conversation or a piece of creative writing. So, how in the world do you build a system to grade something that feels, well, unscorable? Let's jump in and find out. So, here's our game plan. We're going to start with the big problem itself, the grading dilemma. Then we'll look at the fundamental rules for fair scoring. After that, we'll check out the tools of the trade, then tackle the trickiest part of all, the human element. And finally, we'll see how it all comes together to give us that one final score. All right, let's get right into the heart of the challenge. See, when you're scoring, speaking, or writing, you're not just checking boxes. You're evaluating something someone has produced from scratch. And that makes it a whole different ballgame compared to a simple multiple choice test. And this is everything. Just think about it for a second. Two people could give an amazing speech on the exact same topic, and both speeches could be completely different but equally brilliant, right? There's no single correct way to do it. And that's exactly where the difficulty comes in. So if there's no computer-generated answer key, what are we left with? Well, us, humans. It all comes down to human judgment. We need actual people, teachers, examiners, raters, to make the call. Now, that's not a bug, it's a feature. It's the only way it can work. But it's also the very reason we need an absolutely rock-solid process to make sure that judgment is fair and consistent for every single person. So, how do you build a system like that? Well, it all starts with a solid foundation. You need 4 key principles. Think of these as the non-negotiables, the absolute must-haves for any quality scoring system. Let's break them down. First up, validity. This sounds technical, but it's a really simple idea. Are you actually measuring what you say you're measuring? For example, if a test is supposed to be about speaking fluency, a couple of tiny grammar mistakes shouldn't totally wreck the score. The final number has to be a true, honest reflection of the skill you're actually looking for. Next up is reliability, and this one is all about consistency. Imagine you turn in an essay, and one teacher gives you an A, but another teacher gives that exact same essay a C. That's a huge problem, right? That test is unreliable. The goal here is for any performance to get the same score no matter who's grading it or when they're grading it. Without reliability, a score is basically meaningless. Then we've got fairness. This is kind of like a 2-for-1 deal. First, it means everyone gets a level playing field. Nobody should have an unfair advantage or disadvantage. And second, the rules of the game have to be crystal clear. You should know exactly what you're being graded on and how. Transparency here is absolutely key. And last but not least, practicality. Look, you could design the most perfect, intricate, detailed scoring system in the history of the world. But if it takes 10 hours and a team of 5 experts to grade just one essay, it's completely useless. The system has to actually work in the real world, with the time and resources you actually have. Okay, so we've got our 4 guiding principles. Now, what about the actual tools? What do scorers use to put those principles into action? Well, it usually comes down to 2 main approaches, and each one has its own pros and cons. On the one hand, you have holistic scoring. Think of this like giving a movie 1 overall rating out of 10. It's fast, you get a general impression, but it doesn't tell you much about why it got that score. On the other hand, you've got analytic scoring. This is more like rating the movie's acting, its script, its cinematography, and its special effects all separately. It takes a lot more time, of course, but you get a much more detailed picture of what worked and what didn't. All right, we have our principles and our tools. But now we have to talk about the biggest, messiest, most unpredictable variable in this entire equation: the human brain. The single greatest threat to reliable scoring isn't a flaw in the system, it's managing the natural, often unconscious biases that every single one of us has. And these are some of the usual suspects. You've got raters who are just naturally tough graders, and others who are super lenient. Then there's the halo effect. This is when someone's amazing vocabulary, for example, is so impressive that it creates a halo, and you just don't notice all their grammar mistakes. And of course, the power of a first impression, which can unfairly shape how you view the rest of the entire performance. So if we're all walking around with these biases, what's the solution? Training. Lots and lots of training. It's a very specific, structured process. First, everyone has to know the scoring criteria inside and out. Then they practice on what are called benchmark performances. These are perfect, clear-cut examples of each score level. But the most important part is the last step. They all get together and discuss, sometimes even argue about the really tough borderline cases, until everyone is calibrated and on the exact same page. That's how you build a consistent team. So we have our principles, we have our tools, and we have our highly trained raters. The final piece of the puzzle is putting it all together into a system that has checks and balances built right in. And this is how you do it. To make sure one person's bad day doesn't sink a score, you use double marking. That means at least 2 different people score every single performance. If their scores are really far apart, that's when moderation kicks in. They have to meet, discuss their reasoning, and agree on a final score. And to top it all off, you assign work randomly so no single rater gets stuck with, say, all the really great performances or all the really challenging ones. So after all of that, the principles, the tools, the training, the procedures, we get to the real point. The whole reason this entire complicated system exists is for one thing: to create a strong, solid, defensible link between what someone actually did in a test and a fair decision that's made about them, whether that's passing a class or getting a professional license. And that brings us to our final, really important thought. A score, no matter how carefully it's produced, isn't some absolute, perfect measurement of a person's worth or intelligence. It's an indicator. It's just a snapshot of what they were able to do on that particular task on that particular day. So the next time you get a score, or maybe even give one, how might this change the way you think about what that number really means?